And now I'm doing more intuitive healing work. Part of that is because of systems and the system of mental health and how constraining it can feel at times. And I really didn't want to diagnose people anymore, and I didn't want to deal with insurance, and I wanted to broaden how I could do healing. And I didn't feel like I could do it in the way I wanted to within the space of mental health anymore. For many years I did. So I do Akashic readings and intuitive readings and help people connect with their intuition more deeply and engage rituals more. And I do that for individuals and groups as well, group rituals. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a yoga teacher as well, and have been teaching since 2009. And my first book, Skill in Action, which Skill in Action is from the Bhagavad Gita, which you all may be familiar with. It's a sacred text, which feels so relevant to everything that is going on right now in so many ways. But I've said that for a long time about the Bhagavad Gita. So Skill in Action is from that. And that book is really about how exclusive the industry of yoga and wellness is. That came out in 2017, and how capitalism and wellness intersected, and cultural norms around who deserved to be well and who didn't, and who doesn't deserve to be well, and how this plays out in a practice that does teach us that we are interconnected, but in a culture of capitalism that says we're not. And that caused a lot of dissonance for me. And so I ended up asking questions and writing a little bit of my story in Skill in Action, and inviting people in the industry of wellness to ask questions about their practices and appropriation and many things. And then Finding Refuge just came out July 13th, Heartwork for Healing Collective Grief. And the idea for Finding Refuge, I keep changing this because it keeps evolving, but one place that Finding Refuge came from is I have a deep practice with my ancestors, and heard that I needed to create a space, not a book initially, but create a space that was focused on grief. And this was over 2.5 years ago. I didn't know that we would be in a global pandemic. And of course, there are multiple pandemics that have been in place for a long time, but I didn't know we would be here, but the ancestors did. And so they seeded this idea of holding space, which did translate into an online retreat and a book about collective grief with practices in it. And the book has my own stories of grief. And there's a story about my mother and my father and my bees. I have 3 beehives, and my grandmother, and a story of being stopped by a police officer in Pennsylvania, and a story about really healing and coming back into wholeness and clarifying the medicine I wanted to bring forth at this time and in this space and in this lifetime. And so, the book Finding Refuge, I wrote it during the beginning of COVID. So that was the backdrop for writing about collective grief, as I was experiencing so much grief and as my nervous system was completely overwhelmed. In a space where our nervous systems, I always say this, we're not designed to be in a sustained state of crisis. And yet that's where we've been, and it's where we are right now. And some of why we're in a crisis, as you all know, is because of what humans have done. And some of the crises are the things we can't control. I say this because I think there are many things we can control and shift and change, and feel like that's part of what we are meant to do. So the idea came from the ancestors. The book happened, but I also think the idea of collective grief, or the experience of collective grief, and this is actually in the introduction of Finding Refuge, really came from a moment of shattering, and that was when George Zimmerman was acquitted for murdering Trayvon Martin. That was like the moment when I fell apart in a way that was unrecognizable to me, and like seriously feeling like I was in pieces, and watching myself shatter. It was the like witnessing the shattering and being in the middle of the shattering and trying to figure out, am I going to come back together? Like, how is this going to work? I could see that and feel that it was a scary moment, and it was the moment I heard the news and I fell to the floor. And what was happening in that moment was all of the ancestral trauma and grief was coming up and out. That's what I came to understand later. I didn't know that in the moment because of the force in which it was coming, but that's what was happening. And so I feel like in that moment is actually when my ancestors really assigned me with like, you're going to work with this grief, and you're going to work with feeling deeply shattered. And not that they wanted me to feel that way, but the world shatters us in so many ways. But like, you're going to work with this and figure out how to turn this into medicine. That's what I think they did. That's how I would describe it. So that is some about how finding refuge came into being. And what I want to say about this moment and grief is there. And before y'all got on the call, I was just here with Jeff and Mioshin. Mioshin said, there's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot going on in the world. Like, there's a lot going on in the world, right? And I feel like every minute of every day, there's something else going on in the world that we're like being called to respond to notice, to feel, and something about. And I just want to say, I think it's too much.